Hello, I'm Nancy Bering, President of the Manistee County League of Women Voters. The League is a nonpartisan organization of men and women dedicated to supporting citizen participation in government, particularly when it comes to voting. We were born of the women's suffrage movement 102 years ago and have continued this struggle to increase access to the vote by all citizens. Over the years, the United States and Michigan have expanded voting rights to more citizens, and regulations have been created that ensure fair, honest, and secure elections. We have all, at some point in our lives, pledged allegiance to the United States and to the republic for which it stands. Like all relationships, our relationship to that republic is built on trust. And trust can be replaced by mistrust if we are not careful to be sure of the facts. This presentation provides accurate information on the mechanics of registering and voting, the safeguards that exist, the current legislative initiatives, and how to spot mis- and disinformation. We're not advocating for any action today. Indeed, our funding source for this educational program prohibits it. We are simply fulfilling our mission by presenting accurate and, to the best of our ability, up-to-date information on the voting process so that you will trust that you know the facts. We in Manistee are fortunate to have a fine daily newspaper in our community, and we are so pleased to have the Manistee News Advocate as our partners in this endeavor, helping us to get the word out about this presentation. Michelle Graves has been the editor of the Manistee News Advocate and the Benzie County Record Patriot since 2013 when she came to move to Manistee, and she will be monitoring the questions in the chat. Michelle?
Hi, thanks for having me tonight.
Jill Nowak, Manistee County's clerk since 2012, is available to answer questions pertaining to her role as county clerk. Jill has worked for the county for 28 years, serves as a board member and secretary of the Michigan Association of County Clerks, and is a member of numerous state and community organizations. Jill.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for inviting me to the program tonight. I appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to turn it over now to Michelle Graves, who will explain how the questioning will be handled.
Thank you, Nancy. We have allotted time at the end of the presentation for questions for our viewers tonight, as Miriam indicated. Questions can be asked during the program via the Zoom chat, the League of Women Voters Facebook feed of the video, or the News Advocates Facebook feed of the video. Ariel Breen has been our assistant editor at the newspaper since 2021, and she's going to be helping out tonight.
Great. Tonight's program was organized under the leadership of League members Sandy Nelson and Pam Tomke, both of whom are retired public school teachers and election officials. Sandy also serves as a member of the Brown Township Planning Commission. Sandy?
Hello, I'm Sandy. It's really good to see everyone.
Pam served as Township Clerk in Manistee County for 27 years.
Thank
Pam.
you. I'm very pleased that I was asked to help presenting this important information.
Okay, so let's get started.
Okay, thank you, Nancy. We'll begin our program with voting rights. Pam will explain to you who is eligible to vote in a Michigan election. Okay, so the beginning of our program this evening, we're going to be taking a look at election laws in Michigan, and then we're going to get into attempts that are underway right now to change some of those laws. And this is such an important topic because election laws are the foundation of our democracy. So the first step to becoming a voter in our great state of Michigan is to get registered. Current election law requires a person to show proof of their Michigan residency. You also have to be a US citizen. You must be at least 18 years old and not serving a jail sentence in order to vote. Now, there's several methods that you can use to register to vote. You can register in person at your local clerk's office or at any Michigan Secretary of State's office. Voters can also register online or by mail if they have a state-issued ID or a state-issued driver's license. Certain state agencies also allow people to register with them in a paper form. But no matter which method of registration you choose, whether it's online or in person or in mail, you have to prove that you are in fact a Michigan resident. There's several allowable documents that you can use to take care of this. And those are listed on your screen on our slide. And in addition, you're required to sign your registration form, attesting to the truthfulness and the accuracy of the information that you provided. Your signature, your handwritten signature, is very important because it provides a unique way of identifying yourself in all future elections.
So Pam, how can a registered voter vote early?
Any registered voter in Michigan is eligible to vote ahead of the actual election day. And this is called AV voting or absentee voting, and it can happen by mail or in person. Both mail and in-person early voting require that you fill out and submit a written application, and this application must include your handwritten signature. So these applications have to be filled out and signed every time you want to vote AV. In order to use this absent voter ballot process. You fill it out and sign it for each individual election. The process can begin up to 40 days before an election because this is when clerks receive their supply of their printed ballots. All absent voter ballots have to be returned to the precinct in their sealed envelopes by the day of the election. If you're in the military or you are living overseas and you're a registered voter, you are also eligible to use this AV process. So this whole absent voting process or early voting process can be done, as was mentioned, by mail, by using a secure drop box if it's available, or in person, or a combination of these methods. For example, you might get your ballot by mail and drop it off in person, or you might pick up your ballot in person, drop it in a drop box. Voters should contact the clerk in their assigned precinct to find out the specifics of these options. Before using this absent voter or early voter process, you have to be registered. And if you're not sure if you are registered, it's very easy to check online. You can check your registration status and find out also your precinct location. And you can find out your local clerk's contact information. It's all online. There's the website on our screen, michigan.gov/vote.
Great. Could you tell us a bit more about what a voter can expect on election day?
Okay, let's start by saying that if you are a registered voter and you've registered ahead of time, you go to your assigned precinct, you'll fill out an application in the precinct. That's that small square piece of paper. You show your ID. The election inspector will check your information and find your name on the precinct list. You get your numbered ballot, you mark the ballot, you run it through the optical scan machine, and you have voted in person. Most voters who come in to vote in a precinct are already registered ahead of time, and therefore their name will appear on that printed precinct list. If you happen to come into a precinct in your jurisdiction and you're not registered, let's say you recently moved, it's now possible under Michigan law, as of 2018, when Proposition 3 was passed, to vote the same day of an election. This is called same-day registration. It can only happen at your local clerk's office, and you have to have proper documentation to do this. I want to emphasize that only the clerk in your voting precinct can register you that day. For example, you can't go to a Secretary of State's office on election day
and register and vote the same day. You have to be at your local clerk's office. In-person voting in Michigan, all precincts are required to be open from 7 in the morning until 8 at night, and you will be asked to show an ID when you come in to vote in person. If your name is on your precinct list, you're in the right place, you are a registered voter, but for some reason you forgot your ID or it's not in your purse that day or your pocket, current law allows you to sign an affidavit. It's on the back of that little registration slip that I mentioned, or that application slip. You sign that affidavit attesting to your identity. You affirm that you filled out the form truthfully and that you are who you say you are. And all of this is under penalty of perjury. And then if you sign the affidavit, you can be issued a regular ballot, fill it out, it goes through the scan machine, and you have voted. And just as a note, the vast majority of Michigan voters in Michigan bring an ID and show it. In the 2020 election, this past general presidential election, there was a very small fraction of voters who used that affidavit process. It was 0.2% of 1%. 0.2% of all voters in Michigan used that affidavit process. If you were issued an absent ballot ahead of election day, it has to be returned either by mail, in person, or put in a drop box by 8 o'clock on election day in order to be counted. So this Proposition 3 that was mentioned, it was passed in 2018, may have affected the next general election. And Sandy's going to help us by looking at 3 slides comparing 2016 to 2020.
Thank you. Like Pam said, in 2018, Michigan voters passed Proposition 3, which was also known as Promote the Vote, and it expanded our voting rights. Possibly as a result of that, more people voted in 2020 than in 2016, in spite of COVID. The 5.5 million voters who turned out in 2020 represent 71% of the registered voters in the state. The 4.9 million voters from 2016 represent 63% of qualified voters. The next slide shows us about absentee ballot voting. So in 2016, 1.3 million voters chose to use the absentee ballot. In 2020, 3.3 million voters used the absent ballot option. That represents nearly 2/3 of all the votes that came in and were counted were absentee ballots. So now we'll look a little closer at do a recap of the presidential election on the next slide. So in 2016 and 2020, we had fairly close presidential elections. In 2016, Donald Trump won by about 11,000 votes. In the 2020 election, President Biden won by 155,000 votes. We had a closer election in 2016, but there was no drawn-out campaign claiming voter fraud. After the 2020 election, there were multiple audits, court cases, and a report by the Republican-led Senate Oversight Committee, which affirmed that the election was fair and secure. Post-election audits were the most extensive in Michigan history. Pam is going to tell us a little bit more about the audit process. It might bear repeating, and we all know and have heard about the great deal of controversy over this last presidential election that happened in 2020. People claimed that the election was rigged. We heard that it was stolen. We heard that it wasn't fair. And there were numerous court cases filed in our great state of Michigan
all of which found no evidence of widespread voter fraud. I just want to do a quick overview of how elections are administered. In our state, the running of elections is a responsibility that's held by Michigan elected township clerks and city clerks. There are just over 1,500 of these local clerks. They oversee the administration of elections in their own particular jurisdictions. Every step of an election process is covered by the election laws in Michigan, whether it's ordering ballots, issuing absentee ballots, testing voting machines, hiring election inspectors, processing people who come in to vote on the day of the election, or reporting results. All of these steps are covered in detail and must be followed by every local clerk who oversees an election. And each of these steps and many more requires specific documentation. So this is what makes elections reviewable and auditable by county and state officials. For example, just one small part of the process of administering an election in a precinct. A clerk receives a set of ballots for a specific election. Every one of those ballots is numbered, starting with number 1 and going through however many ballots there are in that set. And whether those ballots are used for early voting, sent out as absentees, whether they're marked and tabulated in a precinct by voters who come in on election day, or whether they're left over, because there always are, you never want to run out, so there always are some unused ballots. Every one of those ballots, used and unused, is required by Michigan election law to be accounted for. These ballots are sealed in approved ballot containers. And as I said, every ballot must be accounted for. And all of these steps are carried out and documented in every precinct in Michigan. After the 2020 election, however, there were an unprecedented number of claims of fraud and a number of audits took place. I'm going to just look briefly at 3 types of audits that took place last fall. The first one, our first example, county clerks reviewed procedures in precincts in more than 200 in-person voting precincts. This type of audit reviews procedures and verifies that officials, the clerks and their staff, and poll workers followed the legally required procedures. It also ensured that pre-election requirements were fulfilled and that all the required records were maintained. Our second example of audits in Michigan, there were 4 large jurisdictions that had what we call absent voter counting boards. Now, an absent voting counting board is established to process absent ballots by a trained group of election inspectors, and this process happens separate from the in-person voters who are coming in on election day. During these audits, the Michigan Bureau of Election worked with city and county officials to review records and procedures of these 4 absent voting counting boards. In a third example of audits, this was one that was conducted throughout the state, providing yet another basis for voter confidence. 1,300 Michigan clerks were involved in selecting sample ballots from their sealed set of ballots, and it amounted to some 18,000 ballots. Those votes were counted, and that count was used for a statistical comparison to the statewide totals. And finally, something that's not on our slide, the Michigan Bureau of Elections conducted a full hand count of the presidential results up in Antrim County. That's in northern Michigan. Many of you might remember that because it was the focus of national attention for a while. I went to michigan.gov to find out more about that particular audit, and I didn't read the whole thing, but there's a 54-page report resulting from that audit that showed some examples of human error and no intentional widespread voter fraud. In spite of the results of all these court cases and audits that provided no evidence of voter fraud, the Michigan legislature has begun the process of trying to change some of Michigan's election laws. So this next part of our program is going to tell about some of those efforts. And Sandy's going to start out by telling us some things that are happening.
Thanks. The reaction to the 2020 election has resulted in over 100 bills being introduced into the Michigan House of Representatives. On the screen, you can see just a few examples of the content of some of those bills. In the Senate, a 39 bill package was introduced in March of 2021, as well as another 60 bills, all designed to change election laws.
Maybe it'd be helpful if we go to our next slide and Sandy just looks at an overview of the process of such bills going through the process.
Sure. Here's a quick overview of the legislative process. So a bill starts in the Senate Elections Committee, and I'll tell you a little bit more about that Senate Elections Committee in just a moment. Once it goes through that committee, it goes on to the Senate. And from there, if they pass it, it goes to the House Elections and Ethics Committee. After that, it goes back to the Senate, and then the Senate sends it to the governor. The governor has the option of signing or vetoing the bill. If she vetoes it, legislators can try to override the veto by a 2/3 vote. So currently in the Senate, there are 38 members. 22 of those senators are Republicans, 16 are Democrats. It would take 24 of their votes to override a veto. In the House of Representatives, there are 110 members, 55 are Republicans, 51 are Democrats, and there are 4 vacancies. It would take 71 of their votes to override the veto.
So the next slide will give Sandy a chance to give us those details about the Michigan Senate Election Committee that we just saw on our slide.
Okay, the Senate Elections Committee is a 4-member group made up of the chair, Ruth Johnson, who is our former Secretary of State. She's a Republican from Oakland County. Ed McBroom is a Republican from the Upper Peninsula. Curtis Vanderwall represents Senate District 35, which includes Manistee County. And the lone Democrat is Paul Wojno. He's from Macomb County. The committee began hearing testimony in April, and the hearings are continuing. They've taken testimony on all 39 bills in the package. Most of the bills are still in committee. However, 12 of them have moved on, and some of them have made it as far as the governor's desk. The next slide shows us quickly where you can go for more information. Or
I think it was maybe at the
it
bottom.
was at the bottom of the
that
other one. I'm
previous
sorry.
slide.
If you'd like any information on any of those bills, you can always go to the League website. It's lwvmi.org. Okay, next, Pam is going to tell us about some of the bills that made it as far as the governor's desk.
Well, as Sandy mentioned, some bills in this election package were sent to Governor Whitmer. There were 4 House bills and 4 Senate bills. This happened last fall. The governor vetoed these 8 bills, and she sent a letter to Capitol Hill detailing her reasons for not supporting the passage of those bills. I went online, michigan.gov, and found a copy of the letter. It's very easy to do. These are some of the topics that those vetoed bills dealt with. In Governor Whitmer's letter, she said that the bills perpetuated the big lie that the presidential election was stolen and fraudulent. In her letter, she also stated that the legislation attempted to restrict voter rights and that some of these bills contain legislation that was already in current Michigan law. So on your screen, you can see the topics of these bills. And these are complex, the hearings, the process, and also how can people find out more, Sandy, about specific bills, where they are? It's constantly changing and updating.
You can get a complete copy of the list of bills, the current status of each bill, and the League of Women Voters positions on those bills by going to the League website, lwvmi.org. You can also look up minutes and testimony by going to senate.michigan.gov and select Senate Elections Committee, or you can check the house.michigan.gov website and select the House Elections and Ethics Committee. You can also look up each bill and see an analysis of it at michigan.legislature.gov. So, Pam, are there any other efforts to make sure that voting rights are secure?
Well, I want to mention our Secretary of State's legislative agenda. Our current Secretary of State, who is Jocelyn Benson, has proposed an agenda of legislation that she is recommending, but none of this has been acted upon yet by our senators and representatives. I just want to look at three main goals of her legislative agenda. She wants new legislation to ensure equitable access for all Michigan voters. One of her specific suggestions is that last bullet point there that would make Election Day a state holiday. Her second big goal is to strengthen the infrastructure of voting. This is the way that elections are administered. One highlight here is that fourth bullet point. It would, right now in Michigan, there can be a May and an August election. Her suggestion is to combine those two and have a June election. And in a general election year, that would mean that the primary would be held in June, giving more time between the primary and the November general. Her third big goal is to make voting even more safe and secure. One specific suggestion is that there be a law prohibiting open carry of firearms within 100 feet of a voting location. So now we've talked about how elections work, a little bit about some proposed changes, but there's another way besides that legislative process that Sandy explained to change election laws in Michigan. And there is an effort underway to impact election laws called the Initiative Petition. And so Sandy can tell us about that.
Sure, thanks. There's a new initiative petition called Secure My Vote. The petitions are being circulated now, and they seem to be a response to the 2020 election and the belief by some that there was voter fraud. So in September, this ballot question committee group called Secure My Vote submitted an initiative petition to the State Board of Canvassers. The board approved the form and the summary of their petitions, which are now being circulated. They have to gather over 340,000 valid signatures. The number is equivalent to 8% of the voters who voted for the governor in 2018. This process is used to enact a law that the governor cannot veto. Once the signatures are verified by the Board of Canvassers, the legislature can vote to enact the law or put it on the next general election ballot as long as it doesn't have an appropriation or money associated with it. And I'll talk more about that in just a second. And one more thing. The Secure My Vote ballot question committee is required, all of the ballot committees are required to file a financial report. So this group filed their report in November, and at that time they had $85,000. But $80,000 of it, bulk of it came from one single donor. You can find out all the details of this by going to the Michigan Campaign Finance Statement Detail. And it shows nictusa.com on your screen.
So in our next slide, Sandy's going to walk us through the steps of this initiative petition.
Right. So citizens of Michigan may initiate ballot petitions to do one of three things. The first thing would be to amend the Constitution. The second would be to write new law or change existing law, which is what Secure My Vote does. The third thing is the referendum. A referendum, by definition, is when voters decide if law that has been passed by the legislature should go into effect or not. So valid, once the signatures are validated by the Board of Canvassers, then the petition goes directly to the legislature and they have 40 days to adopt it. If they do adopt it, it becomes law in 90 days. Normally, this 90-day period would be when the citizens have a chance to enact the referendum. But because this particular initiative has an appropriation, has money assigned to it, it cannot go through the referendum process. And so, and it wouldn't be placed on the ballot. A citizen-initiated proposal also may not be vetoed by the governor.
So
Just a second.
I'm sorry.
A citizen-initiated law can be amended by the legislature after it's adopted, but then if they amended it, it would return to the regular legislative process, which is subject to the governor's veto. So that's not going to apply in this case. If the appropriation, the government funds associated, if it has an appropriation, then there can be no referendum. Secure My Vote has an appropriation and there can be no referendum. So
there's a lot of details, things that are in this Secure My Vote. Maybe you could help us look at those in our next couple of slides.
sure. Secure My Vote does not amend the Constitution or allow for a referendum. It would alter existing laws and create a few new ones. On the screen, you'll be able to take a look at some of those. Secure My Vote would mandate that the people disclose partial social security numbers when registering to vote. It would restrict options for verifying identity. If you have no identity, the voter must use the provisional ballot and would have to go back to the clerk's office within 6 days to verify their identity. It would eliminate the use of the affidavit. It would require on absentee ballots that you disclose driver's license or state ID or social security number. No absentee ballot applications could be mailed unless specifically requested. It would ban charitable contributions, volunteer time, and donated space. It would establish a voter access fund, and this is the appropriation. It's $3 million for 1 year to help cover the cost of identification for those who need it. So currently in Michigan, the cost of getting a Michigan state ID is about $10. And finally, it allows the legislature to adopt law without a vote of the people and without a governor veto.
Are other states trying to make changes or making changes in election laws?
Yes, across the United States, 19 states have passed 34 bills that change voting laws. And you can see those states on the screen. They're highlighted in blue.
And what about the legislative response in Washington, D.C. regarding election law?
Well, at the federal level, there are 3 acts. And they're doing okay in the House of Representatives, but they seem to get stuck in the Senate. The 3 acts are the For the People Act, the John Lewis Voting Rights Act, and the Freedom to Vote Act. and they seem to be doomed, so I'm not going
It's
to go into a
very,
whole lot
very
more
currently
detail
in
yet.
the news of what's happening in the Senate with this voting rights acts. So how can people get more information and stay up to date with all of this legislation?
Okay, once again, the league website, lwv.org, has a wealth of information. You can go to the Secretary of State's fact check site at michigan.gov. And this takes us to our final topic, which is fake news. So Pam's going to tell us about fake news.
Let's start out. Everybody's probably heard the term fake news. We're going to talk about false information in two categories. We're going to call it misinformation and disinformation. Misinformation is sharing false information without the intent of causing harm. You can be misinformed about something. It can happen in journalism too. A journalist may misinterpret something and print it or pass it on. It happens a lot on social media. Well-intentioned individuals can share a post or click that like button without realizing that the information is outdated or misleading. And this is an unintentional way to spread false information, but without the intention of causing harm. On the other hand, disinformation is creating and sharing false information where there is an intention to cause harm. For example, ulterior motive like promoting a lie or political gain. And unscrupulous persons who spread disinformation online have a motive behind it. It could be to promote voter suppression. It could be to increase mistrust or sow distrust in our democracy. But the common goal in social media, disinformation, is to have their bad or false information reach the mainstream media by repeating it again and again.
How can you get better at spotting fake news?
Well, so many of us are online now, and we get our news online through email or social media. And there are some specific things we can do to spot disinformation. First, we can consider the source. If you're on a website, look at the URL. Does that address look strange? Is it misspelled in some way? If you're on a website, you can click the About page on the website, find out through Google who's running that page, who's running that website. A second thing that you can do is check the date of the information. Is this really old news? Not that long ago, I saw a post. There was a quote from a current statesperson, and I fact checked it and found out that in fact, it was a quote by this person, but it had been made 15 years ago in a completely different context. And it was being like recirculated now, and it was out of date, and I considered it disinformation. Third thing that you can do before you believe a post or before you repost something is to try to cross-check the information. Do you see this story being reported by reputable news sources anywhere else? As I said, fact-check websites are easy to use and readily available. Fourth thing we can do is to read past the headline. I mean, who hasn't been in a grocery store checkout line and seen some outrageously provocative headline? You know that's not the whole story. So ask yourself, what is the whole story? Be skeptical. Is the headline telling the entire story? And a final tip is to be aware of emotionally charged content. When you see an image or a meme that is designed to spark anger, make you fearful, promote outrage, or make you sad or worried, question it. Disinformation often uses an emotionally charged message in an attempt to sow division. And so for our final PowerPoint slide of the evening. Sandy's going to tell us what are some things we can do to combat misinformation and disinformation.
First of all, never quote the bad information. This only helps to spread the bad message wider. Studies show that repeating bad information, even to debunk it, makes people more likely to remember the bad information and not the good. Refer to the bad information without quoting it. For example, you could say, false claims about the legitimacy of the 2020 election have been made, rather than saying, Representative XYZ says that thousands of ballots were being stuffed into ballot boxes. This isn't true. Well, when you do that, the image that sticks in everyone's mind is of the ballot boxes being stuffed. So try and focus on providing the correct information, and if possible, include trustworthy sources where people can go to learn more information. It cannot be said enough. Do not repeat or quote bad information. And this concludes our presentation. So we'll move now to the question and answer portion, and I'll turn the program over to Michelle. Or Ariel.
Hi. Yes, so we do have a few questions here. The first one is from Chris. When will precinct changes due to Michigan redistricting be available on michigan.gov, on county clerk websites, or at local clerk's offices?
What a good question.
Yeah.
Well, I can speak to the county clerk portion. I don't know about michigan.gov. That would be at the Secretary of State's level. We do have our local redistricting results on our website under the county clerk page. I could post the links to the new Senate, representative, and congressional districts. However, we know that there's been some lawsuits that have been already filed on these mappings. And so I don't know that they would change, but I could put the link on there to those maps. That's not an issue. I could do that. Yeah. I'll make a note of it.
Thanks, Jill. Our next question is from Nikki. If the clerk is a candidate on the ballot, are they supposed to be at the voting place? If they are not, how is it handled for same-day registration for new voters? Who is able to do the same-day registration?
Well, the clerk should be in her office. If she's on the ballot, she can still be in her office. And that way, if someone wants to come in to register to vote, they go to the office. They don't register to vote in the precinct at the precinct tables. They go to the clerk's office. So the clerk can still help those new voters to vote that day, to get registered and to vote. The clerk can also, if there's a problem in the precinct, it is her statutory duty to run elections. So if there's a problem in the precinct and the precinct chair can't help figure out the problem or deal with it, the clerk can go into the precinct, take care of the problem, and go back to her office.
Thank you.
Did I cover everything? I think so.
I think so.
Okay.
The next question is from Gerard. He says, my legally cast vote in the 2020 election was decertified by my congressman twice. My Michigan House and state reps have been promoting false narratives about election integrity in Michigan. Why has the press written so little about this? And what can I do to hold my elected officials accountable for promoting voting falsehoods? Pam or Sandy, maybe whoever wants to field this one.
If I got a question like this from a voter who was in my precinct, I guess I would ask, I'm not really sure what it means by my vote was decertified by my representative. So I don't know really how I would answer that. I mean, if a person comes in and votes and their vote is tabulated, whether it's an absent ballot, it can be verified that that particular absent ballot was in fact returned. and tabulated, or if the person came into the precinct and voted in person, there would be a record of that having happened, and their ballot would be among the ones that were counted. So I'm not clear on what the questioner is asking.
He says all of our votes were decertified by Jack Bergman. I guess that's what was meant by decertified.
That would be my question. What does the questioner mean by that?
We'll see if we can get some clarification on that, and we'll move to the next question from Nikki in reference to what the governor vetoed. She wants to know, to be clear, would it have to be a 2/3 vote from each house to override a veto? And did she veto 8 bills or 4, as the slide indicated?
Okay, my understanding, which is limited, is that there were 4 bills presented to the governor that were House bills, and that means they originated by the House of Representatives or a committee. And there were 4 Senate bills. The numbers, I can't remember if the numbers were on the slide. All 8 of those bills were vetoed. And the question, if a Senate bill is vetoed, does just the Senate have to do the override? I believe it's yes. I'm not going to stake my life on that answer.
Okay, the next question here is from John. He asks, how does the Michigan Board of Canvassers validate the signatures on a petition?
They have staff that checks every signature. They go to the qualified voter file and they check those signatures, that they're registered voters in whatever district they're signing that petition for, and that the address is correct and that the date is correct. So it's done at the state level, and they actually look at each signature on that petition.
Okay. And then John also asks, what is the purpose of a partial social security number? Can that partial number be used for identification?
I
Well-
think that's what it's going, that's the gist of the whole thing, is that it to be used for identification, from what I understand.
Signature, go ahead. Yeah. Could I make just a quick addition to what Jill said about checking the signatures? I think it's probably a process similar, Jill, don't you, to what the local clerks do when we, for example, get an application for an absent voter ballot. We use what you referred to, the qualified voter file, to see that person's name, their address, where their precinct is located, if it in fact is our jurisdiction. And we look at their signatures because those digital signatures are all online and available through the qualified voter file, which is a computer program. We can see the digital signature and compare it to the one that we received. So
Yeah, it is the same process that the local clerks use, even to say somebody signs a petition to run for county commissioner or county clerk. If we file petitions with names and signatures on there, the local clerks check every one of those. So I believe that's the same process at the state level.
Okay, and kind of as a follow-up to the Social Security question, John was wondering, how does a partial Social Security number work to identify anybody?
4 digits.
Go ahead, Sam. Yeah.
I don't know how, but they are, it's the last 4 digits is what I believe the bill is wanting to require.
Okay, so it sounds like we don't have an exact answer to that one.
Yeah, I would think, Michelle, that once over history, if that law does go into effect, or I think there's some some proposal out there to have that done. That once that database gets built, then that last 4 digits of that social number will be used as an identifier to say, this is Jill Nowak and these are the last 4 digits. It'll be probably stored in the qualified voter file as well, once that database gets built, if that's what this questioner is asking.
So
Okay.
isn't it true that currently social securities are not part of Michigan voter registrations? That's not people don't put in their social security number now when they register to vote.
Well, on the application to register to vote, you can put your 4-digit social, the last 4 digits of your number or your driver's license number, I believe. So
Is that
so it has to
optional?
be- it's an or issue. But it's not stored anywhere in any database at all. So I don't know if that law that is being contemplated would do that. I haven't really read that law fully, but I know there's been talk about that.
Okay, so we have several questions kind of regarding signatures, such as, what if someone's signature doesn't match the one on file due to the voter having had a stroke that year? If the signature doesn't match, can it be disqualified? I'm getting older. My signature is not as nice as it was more than 40 years ago when I registered to vote. Do I need to update my signature with my clerk?
Well, I agree. Signatures change over the years. And I can tell you that if our local clerks get a application to vote or a ballot where the envelope is signed on the outside and it doesn't match that signature that's on file, our clerks will call those voters and say, we have your signature here from your application or from your ballot. It doesn't match what we have on file. Can you stop by? Can we get an updated signature from you? It is very rare that we ever deny someone the right to vote because their signature doesn't match. I mean, and is it done in the bigger counties? I don't know, but our clerks know our voters and they're very, very good about counting every ballot that comes in. So, yeah, they do change over time. And if you've been registered since you've been 18 years old and you're now 65, you might want to stop by your clerk's office and say, my signature has changed drastically. Can we update that? And they would be glad to do that.
And Jill, isn't it possible when you reapply for a driver's license that your new signature is updated, because it all goes through the Michigan Secretary of State, which is where we all get our driver's licenses or state IDs. So that signature, don't they use the most current one?
That's true. When you move and you go change your driver's license or you renew it every, what is it, five or 6 years now,
Right.
that current signature gets, I don't want to say rewritten over, but gets updated in the Secretary of State's information. And that's what we use as our qualified voter file. So yes, Pam, that's very true. So over the years, you're buying a new car, you're moving, it gets updated. Yeah, it's really not an issue, it doesn't seem, but if there ever is a problem, we don't just discard that application to vote or that ballot return because of that signature.
Okay, so kind of continuing this, we have a couple other questions about signatures, such as, what about signatures on the Secure Michigan vote? I'm not sure, but I think the person might be asking, about those signatures matching. And then if driver's license signatures used or voter registration signatures are used as I think you kind of answered that. If our driver's license signatures used or voter registration signatures used as a comparison, the person asking the question said that it's confusing for them because they use their middle initial, but the form requires the middle name.
There are rules that signature can vary a bit. If it's Jill M. Nowak and I sign it Jill Nowak, the clerk will take that. If it's William Nowak and they sign it Bill Nowak, they will take that because that is a variance of the name William. So there are procedures that a clerk will follow to look at when something doesn't match exactly to make sure that that would be allowed.
All right, forgot about the mute button. So kind of still along those lines a little bit, we had a couple questions about identification. Why does the Republican Party state that the Democratic Party is opposed to voter ID? I'm not sure if that's something any of us can answer, Pam or Sandy. I don't know if you have any.
There is a voter ID requirement in current Michigan law when you come into a precinct. I mean, when I vote in my precinct where I'm the clerk, I take out my driver's license and show it. If I didn't do that, I would be required to sign that affidavit. I don't know why someone would think one party was opposed, one wasn't, because that is current Michigan law that you do show, a picture ID in your precinct.
Okay, I hope that helps a little bit. Another question about signatures is how can we compare signatures that are squiggles, not a real signature?
I have had experience with that. As a former teacher and a person who learned cursive back when I was in school, and having a rather small, precinct, I had between 600 and 700 voters. Not every single one of them voted, but I actually got pretty good at recognizing someone's signature, the big loopy ones or the scrawling ones or the very neat ones. And the signature is only one method of identifying, a person to make sure that it is who they say they are. I have actually gone through qualified voter file and looked at a signature when it's, just like some scribbly lines as the questioner mentioned. And if it looks the same on their driver's license as it does on that registration, that satisfies me. If it looks different, or say several applications, this has not happened, but if they came in from the same household and it was all the same type of writing, like somebody signed them all, I'm going to sign my husband's and I'm going to sign my neighbors and my elderly mother's, you would know it. I mean, you could tell. And that as I said, I have not had that happen, but I have gone into qualified voter file to look at some of these signatures. And, when somebody develops an unusual signature that's real slanty or just scribbles, they do it the same every time. Because that's them signing their form, whatever the form is. So, you can see that it matches or that it's, that it doesn't.
Thank you for that response. Also another one about identification. If no picture ID is required to sign a petition, why do we need a picture ID to accompany an absentee ballot?
That's an excellent question. And that would be a question that I would think the group that's circulating that petition, Secure My Vote, that would be an interesting question to ask of them.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't have a better answer to that, Michelle, other than that's just election law right now. And if, someone is really concerned about that, they should take that to their legislator and see where it goes. But that's the law at the moment.
All right. Janice said, I recently saw in Texas To apply for an absentee ballot, voters must provide a driver's license or their social security number, whichever they used when they originally registered to vote. Evidently, many voters don't remember which number they used and have applied for an absentee ballot using the wrong number. Because the clerks are not allowed to contact voters, many voters are being denied an absentee ballot. Would this be possible in Michigan if the voter initiative passes?
I've been reading a lot about Texas, and quite a high number of absent voter applications have been rejected because of some of the things that our questioner mentioned. I didn't know that clerks could not contact those voters. I hope that's not a law, because I and other clerks that I've known for many years frequently contact voters. You know, we have if they give a phone number, and a lot of times it's your neighbor, and you'll say, hi, you know, you forgot to sign, or, you know, you didn't put your date of birth, or, you know, can you stop by the office and we'll make an appointment and take care of that. You know, the clerk's job, as Jill always helped us remember, is to help people vote. That's what we're there for. Clerks are there to enable people to exercise their right to vote, to make it convenient, to make it simple while following the laws. And so if clerks were not allowed to contact a voter, I can't even, I don't know, Jill, what do you say? I can't even imagine that would be a law, but
You know, I don't know what the
hope
law, yeah, I don't know what the law is in Texas, but in Michigan, there is no law that says a clerk cannot contact a voter.
I have more than once taken applications to a hospital if someone was in the hospital and couldn't, you know, get an application. I've stopped and picked up ballots, made appointments for people to come to my office. You know, you do everything you can to make it easy and convenient for people to exercise their right to vote. To me, that's the essence of what Michigan or any election laws should do.
And those couple of things that Pam just mentioned are allowed by election law, where the clerk can pick up a ballot or can take an application to vote to old folks' home or a hospital. That is all allowed by election law in Michigan.
We might want to mention too, as part of the law, not everyone can do that. You know, someone can't go through their subdivision and collect everyone's absent ballot. Only certain people are allowed by law to have an absent ballot in their possession. We're talking, you know, felonies, right? If, you know, you go around, as I said, in your subdivision and start collecting everyone's absent ballot, you're not allowed to do that. But as Jill mentioned, you know, clerks or a designated representative of the clerk, you know, can do that to enable it for people to vote who would have some type of a hardship.
Okay. I want to go back to the previous question that was kind of asked, and we were looking for clarification on. So the question was, why has the press or the News Advocate written so little about our representatives trying to promote falsehoods about our election integrity? Our congressman voted to decertify Michigan votes on January 6th, 2021. The question is, how can we hold our elected officials accountable for promoting the big lie, which Governor Whitmer mentioned, that the 2020 election was fraudulent? The presentation made it clear that the 2020 election was audited and determined to be free of fraud. In my response, the news for the News Advocate, and we can't speak to, you know, any other press, kind of like Sandy and Pam mentioned in the presentation, part of what we want to do is not repeat disinformation, and we also don't want to give people a platform for misinformation. I would recommend, you know, a way to hold elected officials accountable is to simply don't vote for them again, and you could encourage others not to vote for them as well. If anybody else wants to add anything.
I was just going to say the same thing, Michelle. If to hold someone accountable is is, hit them where it hurts and you don't vote for them, whether it's the Democrats or the Republicans. If you're not agreeing with who's representing you, then to me, it's like you don't vote for that person. That's how I feel as well.
Thank you. We have, I believe that this was answered or partially answered with another question, but just if we could reiterate, a question from Marcia is, how are petition signatures certified?
Well, they're done by staff at whatever level it's filed at, if it's at the local level or the state level. Staffers go into the qualified voter file and they look to see if that person is a registered voter at that address in the county or the township or the municipality that they've signed that petition for. And that the date that they sign it is prior to the date that's noted at the bottom of that petition. And that's how a petition is that's how the voters are certified. I don't know about the petition. There's petition language too that also has to be certified, and that's prior to even circulating petitions. So I'm not really sure which end they're talking about there. Is it the language or the voters? But I've explained the voter. The language goes to the election commission, I believe, at the state level, if they're talking about a state petition, and the state election commission certifies that it's understandable language or not understandable language.
Another thing, when certifying the signatures, people are only allowed to sign once. So, if they have signed twice or signed in 2 different jurisdictions, those kinds of things would be red flags. But as Jill said, the point is to make sure that that voter is a real person in that particular district, and that is their real signature.
Along those lines, Bonnie asked, do they compare signatures at that time? I think she's in reference to the petition. Are signatures compared, when they're certifying them?
They are reviewed. I believe they are compared. I mean, as Pam said earlier, if you have a petition that's filled out and you have the same handwriting in the 9 spots on that one petition, then you know that something's up and you'll look into it a little further. I think first you're looking at to see if that person's even a voter, a registered voter in that municipality that they're signing for. And then you look at the name to make sure that it's not a variation of a name, but you might have 3 male persons in the same household with Joe, Bob, and Phil, and that the right signature is for the right person. And so those are things that we look at to make sure that the petitions are correct and qualified.
Okay. And then we just had a question. I know that I think Miriam was trying to look for the information for the website, for the financials for Secure Michigan Vote. I don't know if anybody has that offhand.
You can find any campaign financials on the Secretary of State's website at michigan.gov/elections. There's a campaign finance area there. And if you go to that page, you can look up every candidate at the state level. And you can look up groups that are sponsoring initiatives. There's a lot of information on there. I don't know if that's the website the league has, but I'm familiar with the campaign finance.
Okay. She says it was on the slide that you had during the presentation.
Yeah, that's correct. It was, it's in the chat, the one that they referenced in the slide, and I dropped it into my search bar and came up with a login that didn't work. So I will find the website that Jill just mentioned and put that in the chat.
Thank you. I think that that's all the questions that we have. Let me just check real quick. Yep, that seems to be all the questions that we have for tonight.
Good. Thank you, Michelle. And thank you for all of you who submitted questions. It elicited a very interesting conversation, and a lot of good information came forward. Thank you for submitting those questions. And Michelle, thanks for doing such a good job of fielding those. Before we go, I'd like to thank the presenters, Sandy Nelson and Pam Tomke, Michelle Graves and Ariel Breen from the Manistee News Advocate, Jill Nowak, County Clerk, and our technical person, without whom this would not have been possible, our board member from Kalamazoo, Miriam Epskamp, who, if you haven't noticed, has been working with her non-dominant hand because of her broken arm. And finally, thanks to all of you who tuned in tonight for caring enough about our democracy to watch this program and learn the facts about your voting rights. This program has been recorded and will be available on the League's website, Facebook page, and YouTube channel, as well as the Manistee News Advocates website and Facebook page. Thanks for watching.
Thank you.